conversational. So however you feel comfortable would be great. Good question. Good afternoon. My name is Caitlin Reese, and I am the co-chair of Balancing the Scales of Justice. Thank you so much for being here today. I want to give a special thank you to Trinity Cathedral and staff, especially Abby Zimmerman and Mother Kate for their assistance in this event today, and especially to our panelists and to Doug Kobernick for being here. I'm very excited for this conversation today as we hear from Doug and others who are on the front lines of our correctional system about the challenges and opportunities facing Nebraska and Nebraska citizens involved in the criminal justice system. I'd now like to introduce Mother Kate, who will lead us in an opening prayer.
Let us pray. Loving God, we come together today to reflect on those involved in our systems of corrections and criminal justice, both those who are the makers and the implementers of policies and decisions and those who are impacted by them. We thank you for this opportunity to be mindful for this part of our common life, and especially for those who are taking time to share their thoughts and experience with us today. We ask you to open our minds and our hearts as we remember the example of Jesus, who always centered love and justice in his care for those at the margins. We ask that you bless us with open minds and hearts as we strive to increase our knowledge and understanding of these complex issues, that we might be better at manifesting your love and care for all of your beloved ones. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Right. Now it's my pleasure and honor to introduce my friend and colleague, Doug Kobernick, the Inspector General for Corrections. Doug is the first Inspector General for Corrections for the state of Nebraska. He was appointed to the position for a 5-year term by the Nebraska legislature in September 2015 and reappointed to a second 5-year term in September 2020. Prior to that appointment, Doug worked as a legislative aide in the Nebraska legislature for 18 years, working for 4 different state senators. His areas of specialization during that time included juvenile justice, developmental disabilities, criminal justice, wind energy, and concussion awareness. He also staffed a number of committees and task forces, including the Developmental Disabilities Special Investigative Committee and the Department of Correctional Services Special Investigative Committee.
Thank you, Caitlin. And thank you for inviting me, and I'm glad everybody came out today. Again, my name is Doug Kobernick, and I was appointed to this position, as she said, back in 2015. And there's a little history behind how this Office of Inspector General of Corrections came to be. In 2014, the legislature had a special committee to look at the Nico Jenkins situation. And as part of that process, it expanded out and looked at a lot of other correctional issues. And so when it did that, the senators that were involved decided something, they had to come up with different recommendations and things to do. And one of them was, I think it was Senator Christ, Bob Christ said, why don't we create an Inspector General of Corrections? And so the next year they did. And so they gave it specific duties and responsibilities. And it is copied after the Inspector General of Child Welfare that they created back in 2012, when there was a lot learned about the child welfare system and how broken it was and everything. So in 2015, the legislature passed a bill to create this office, and then in September, I was hired as the first Inspector General of Corrections. 5 years later, I was appointed to a second 5-year term. The office itself provides accountability and oversight of the state's corrections and parole systems, and it has the responsibility of investigating critical incidents, identifying systemic issues, and providing recommendations for improvement. The correctional system in Nebraska is made up of 10 prisons, though 2 prisons are kind of merging up, so soon will be to 9. They go across the state. There's around 5,450 individuals that are incarcerated, both men and women. There's about 2,300 positions, staff positions, when they're fully staffed, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. 8 of the facilities are for men, 1 facility is solely for women, and there is 1 community corrections facility that has both men and women in it. To give you a quick idea of how the system works, if I was a woman, I would start out at the York prison, which is a minimum, medium, and maximum custody facility. So I would go there, they kind of assess me, see what I needed to do, but I pretty much would stay there until I would move to a community corrections center in Lincoln toward the end of my sentence. If I was a man over 18, if I'm 18 or younger, I would go to the youth center here in Omaha. But if I was over 18, I would start at the intake center in Lincoln, and then they would assess me, figure out what my needs are, what custody level I would be, and then they would put me into a different facility. So if I was a maximum custody, for this I'll just start out, it would be a maximum custody. I would either go to Tecumseh, the State Penitentiary, or the Lincoln Correctional Center. As I move my way through the system, if I'm doing well, I could go to medium custody, which would be at a few other, like 4 different facilities could house me then, and then minimum custody, which would be the State Penitentiary or the Omaha Correctional Center. And then I would go to community corrections, hopefully. In between there, I could go out in McCook, which is kind of in between minimum and community custody, and I would probably stay there for 6 to 9 months before going to the community. At any time during that stay, if there's an end to my sentence, I could be paroled or I could jam out, and jamming is basically when you hit the end of your sentence and you can just walk on out. As I said earlier, the office was created due to serious issues being identified within the Department of Correctional Services. And since 2015, when I was appointed, I would like to say that there have been positive changes within the department, such as an improved assessment and classification system, improved restrictive housing policies, the beginning of a peer support program, creating of different mission-specific housing units, allowing outside groups to come on into the inside a little bit more and help people, as you'll hear in the roundtable, and then better compensation for staff. However, as my annual report will show later this week, the office is responsible for putting out an annual report by September 15th of every year. So we've been doing those since 2016. The system remains in crisis for a number of reasons. Staffing shortages are incredibly serious, as the number of staff vacancies have dramatically increased during this past year. There are over 500 vacancies out of about 2,300 positions. That's more than double the total from 2016. And I have, actually in my binder back here in my folder, I have a stack that lists every position that's vacant, and it's just page after page after page. As a result, about 2/3 of our incarcerated men are now residing in prisons that are under staffing emergencies that were declared by Director Frakes, which means they've had limitations placed on them as far as out of cell time and access to programming. Their food is delivered differently. It's a different type of food in the morning. All sorts of things are now being impacted at those places. There's 4 facilities that now have that staffing emergency. The other facilities, they will be more open from about 6 o'clock in the morning till maybe 9 o'clock at night. These are more tightened up, maybe 7 to 7, but even earlier. So they have very limited opportunities compared to what they had in the past. Tecumseh in the Reception and Treatment Center, which is the combination of the Lincoln Correctional Center and the Diagnostic and Evaluation Center, are the 2 facilities that are under the most significant amount of duress. And most of the time, they are fortunate if they can reach a minimum level of staffing. This has resulted in numerous lockdowns, which have caused a great deal of stress, tension, and disruption at those facilities. Lockdowns, when you basically you are locked down in your cell or your housing unit for long periods of time, impact the delivery of medical care, mental health care, visitation with your family, group activities, programming, education, and more. Access to even your job. You might have a job in a shop where you're getting paid money at that facility, but then if you're locked down, you're not getting out there to do that work. Then that impacts the whole operation of the facility, because if I'm out there and I'm doing a laundry job, but now I can't go out and do the laundry job, the laundry doesn't get turned around as fast, so then people don't get their laundry in time, or the food service, or things like that. So there's a lot of things that result from these operations, these modified operations. My office is keeping a very close eye on these situations, and also the legislature. We inform the legislature about what's going on. In fact, Senator Lathrop and the Judiciary Committee are holding a special listening session for staff this Wednesday night so that they can hear about the working conditions in the prisons right now. As a result of staffing shortages, overtime has also continued to grow. In 2015, when I first started, total overtime hours per month were about 20,000 hours, which is quite a bit of overtime. Now it's not unusual for that to be at 50,000 hours. A lot of people work 16-hour shifts. Well, they'll do like 3 or 4 days of 16-hour shifts, and then they get, on their last day of their work week, they can only work 8 or 12 hours, but that's a lot of hours. And if you are somebody, for instance, at Tecumseh, and you're working you work a 12-hour shift from 7 to 7, but then you get held over because they need your body there to man a post. Then you stay for another 4 hours, so you work 16 hours, but then you have to drive home. So a lot of people don't live in Tecumseh, they live somewhere else. So they might drive to Omaha or Lincoln or somewhere in between, and they'll spend maybe 45 minutes to an hour on the road. So there you got, if you get off at 11 o'clock at night, by the time you get home, it's probably 12:30. Then you have to do some things at home, you're kind of wound up, you can't get to sleep, so you don't get to sleep right away, but then you have to be back at work the next morning at 7 o'clock. That makes it for very stressful conditions for those staff. Last year, turnover in the department was actually a positive thing, where it had gone down a little bit. It still was higher than in years past, but it was starting to trend down, but now that has gone up as well. So that's a very bad sign for where the facilities and the staffing are headed right now. I look back, and over the last, if we project out toward the end of this year, over the 7-year period, there's over 4,100 people that will have left employment with the department. That's a lot of people, and if the department had been able to convince 10% of those to stay, they really wouldn't be in much of a staffing problem right now. This past fiscal year, from July 1 of 2020 to the end of June, 350 people went through their in-service training. This is a dramatic drop as well. In the past, it's been at least 500 people. A few years ago, it was over 650 people. So they're losing people at a higher rate than they have, and they're having a tough time getting people in. So when you combine all that, that's why we have such a staff shortage right now. I would say that there was one good thing about COVID this last year, and that was that it kept the prison population, or brought it down, because the court systems kind of slowed down and people were not coming into the system, so the intakes really slowed down. So the prison system went from about 5,700 people to 5,400 people. So that was one good thing, so it kind of lessened the overcrowding. Prior to that, we were the second most overcrowded system in the country, and Now I'm not quite sure where we're at, but having a little fewer people, a few more open spots in those facilities is good. It lessens the stress and everything, but we have all these other factors playing into it, so it really probably doesn't feel much different. So when you have that significant crowding, that impacts the quality of life for the incarcerated individuals. It impacts the work environment for the staff, and it really does not allow the staff to do what they need to do and to work to the best of their abilities. So there's a lot of things that happen with the overcrowding and the staffing shortages when you combine them. When you have all this taking place, it makes it very difficult to provide the supports and programs necessary for the population. It also creates, as mentioned earlier, unsafe conditions. Right now, my office is looking at a number of incidents that have happened in some of these facilities, and we're trying to figure out, are they the result of the conditions there? Are they just things that happen? So we're doing a lot of looking into those kind of things. A lot of times, people then say, well, what can be done? Why, you can talk about all these negative things that are happening in the prison system, but what can be done? And sometimes I like to kid around a little bit, and I say, well, if I had a DeLorean and Marty McFly, we could go back to the future, and we could follow through on the recommendations that have been made in the past and kind of learn and do those things. But unfortunately, we don't have one of those, and so we can't do that. But here are a few things that I want to just share today before ending. First, the leadership of the department in each facility really need to make a consistent and thoughtful effort to go out and spend time with their staff and the incarcerated individuals. They need to listen to them and hear what they have to say about the conditions. A lot of them have really good suggestions. A lot of those good suggestions I actually take and put into my annual reports, and I have pages of recommendations from the past that I think are very good, and they're not because of me, they're because of people like that who have talked with me when I go out and visit the facilities or go places and learn from people and everything, and I think that's what the department needs to do more of. Second, after listening, they need to act upon those things. They can't make excuses or just give lip service. They need to really get out there and act with a purpose and include those who are being impacted as part of that process of change. Well, there are times decisions need to be top down. There are other times when we really need to involve those people in that decision-making process and then the carrying out of those decisions. I think that's very important. That's something that can be done, and that doesn't cost anything either. Neither one of these two things cost anything, but they would really help out. Third, wages need to be addressed, not just for the frontline staff, which have increased quite a bit lately and everything, and I give Director Frakes credit for that, but we have issues with wage compression, where the people who did get the nice bumps in pay, now some of them make more than their supervisors, which then causes further problems, because now you have supervisors who are not happy with where they're at. They don't feel appreciated or rewarded for what they're doing. They have very difficult jobs too. And now they're supervising people who are getting paid more than them, or they're about the same. So that creates a lot of staffing difficulties as well. And then it also makes it very difficult to recruit people into those supervising positions. And then if you can't get good quality people in those supervising positions, then you don't have good supervisors, and that creates difficulty for those staff again. So you have all the stress of the overtime and everything, and then if you don't have good supervisors, that adds on to that. We also need better pay for kitchen staff, recreation staff, maintenance staff, mental health practitioners, chemical dependency counselors, nurses, and others. There's a lot of these areas that have been neglected. While we have made some strides in those frontline staff positions, it's all these other ones too that are part of this gigantic corrections puzzle that needs to be addressed. We can't just say, wow, we did it for this group, we're good. Congratulations. We need to do it for everybody and really make sure that the whole system is getting rewarded, and so that we can have really good quality people. And the other thing I would add too is that as you add that monetary factor into it, we also need to demand more people, and then we need to give them more skills and training and everything as well. Fourth, I would bring in experts to conduct evaluations of the different components of the correction system, especially in programming, classification and assessment, restrictive housings, and others, and then I would implement those necessary improvements. I think we can do a lot better. I mean, there's been efforts made to make programming better, make restrictive housing better, but we can't just stop where we're at. We need to keep striving to do the best, because if you can do better, then you have better outcomes, and that helps our whole community. Fifth, I would expand job training, both hard and soft skills, for the population, as well as educational opportunities. This keeps people busy inside the facilities, it allows them to earn some more money, and also keeps them out of trouble while preparing them for their future release. So I've been advocating for that for a long time. We need to do more of that. Back in the day, they used to have a lot more job training opportunities, and a lot of incarcerated men have come to me and they tell me about programs in other states and stuff that they can do that have been done. Why can't we do those things in Nebraska? So I think we could do that. And then I would end by saying sixth thing I would do is listen some more. You can never stop doing that. You need to be engaged with the staff and the incarcerated folks and see what they have to say and keep learning from them. So I'll end with this. I really, as you can tell, I think I'm getting a little excited. I enjoy my job. It's very challenging. It's exciting to be involved with public policy and to help make change better for people and for our state. I really appreciate that. And I'm very appreciative of the legislature for giving me an extra staff member last year, because for the first 5+ years it was only me doing all this stuff, and that was a little stressful. So I have Zach Pluhacek that came over and works for me, and he's done an incredible job. And we've been able to really dig in and get into these issues a lot more. You know, having 2 bodies instead of 1 is huge. So the last thing I'd like to say is, all these things being said, there's so many good things that happen every day out there in the correction system. We have so many staff that are dedicated to helping others. We were out at one facility the other day, and I talked to a staff member on a housing unit, and I said, "How are you?" And she started to cry because she said, "Nobody asked me that." And we had a little talk, and she talked about how much she cared about each of those individuals in her unit and how she wants the best for them and she wants to have good outcomes for them. And she's not the only one like that. There's a lot of people out in that system that are like that. Unfortunately, we've lost a lot of those people too because of the poor conditions. If we could have kept more of those people, this system wouldn't be in the crisis that I'm describing today. And the other thing is that the people that reside out in the prisons, they inspire me a lot. There's some amazing people, a lot of amazing people out there that work hard to improve themselves and improve their lives. They care about their families out here in the community. They want to do better. They want to get out. They want to help move things forward and move themselves forward. A lot of them have been through a lot of trauma and stress and all sorts of things that I can't even imagine, but they're still trying to get better. And I think the panelists can talk about how they see these people and they can tell similar stories. So I am inspired all the time by the staff and the incarcerated men and women. And with that, I'll end my little speech here. Thank you.
If you're like me, you have lots of questions that you want to ask Doug. And the great news is that we are going to get to ask those questions in conversation with the rest of our panel here today. So I'm going to introduce them, and then we'll start with some questions. So Rick Carter has more than 20 years of nonprofit executive experience and serves as the program and operations manager for the Community Justice Center, a restorative justice organization providing programming in all Nebraska state correctional facilities, all 12 Nebraska probation districts, and the Douglas County Jail. Rick retired from the United States Army in November 2019 after serving 30 years in the U.S. Army and the Nebraska Army National Guard. Rick has served as an aide in the United States Senate to former U.S. Senator Bob Kerrey, as well as political consultant and campaign staff in various local and state elections. He has a BS in criminal justice and an MS in leadership education, both from the University of Nebraska. Rebecca Smith is a private practice attorney who has been working in criminal defense in Omaha for about 30 years. She founded a jail reading ministry called Read Me a Story. Children's books are taken to inmates so they can record a bedtime story for their child or grandchild. The recording and the book are then sent to the child. Additionally, Rebecca is a postulant in the diaconal process. Jeremy Bowman currently serves RISE as the founder and CEO. Prior to joining RISE, he served for 7 years as Associate Vice President of Development at Creighton University. Jeremy has 19 years of leadership experience in higher education and nonprofit organizations in New York City, Baltimore, and Omaha. He earned a BA in Communications in Pennsylvania and a Master of Science in Leadership from Creighton University. So I have a few questions to get us started, although I do want to hear from our audience both here in the sanctuary and online. If you're joining us virtually, please post your questions in the chat box and we'll make sure they get asked and answered. So let me grab the microphone. I should have grabbed that before I came up here and we'll get started. Okay, so I thought we'd begin by, I've read your bios, but we'd start with how you began your work or ministry with those involved in the criminal justice system.
Hello? There we go. Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Jeremy Bowman from RISE, and my mom is here from Chicago. I just want to say that. She's a good Lutheran, and I remember the Lutherans Episcopalians kind of said, hey, we can get along and do a lot of things together, right? When I was growing up, my dad's a Lutheran pastor, so what a joy for her to be dragged, or join me down here this afternoon away from her grandkids. So I worked at Creighton University for about 7 years, and through my church, Christ Community Church, I became a Stephen minister, and I started volunteering at the Douglas County Jail. So I would go in once a week after work for an hour, and I would mentor men who were pre-trial, where they would be waiting to be released or waiting to be sentenced. And so over the years, just over 100 men that I came alongside and got to see a lot of common themes around generational incarceration. Many have had family members that were also incarcerated, issues around mental health. Department of Corrections is the largest mental health care provider in our state, substance abuse issues, and just a lack of opportunity, and just how many, black and brown people that we lock up in our state. And all of these issues really came on my heart as something that I felt like I needed to do something about. And so started this organization 5 years ago, where we really focus on developing the whole person. And I can share more in a moment about what our organization does. But it was my volunteering through my church that really got me passionate about this, and I would go to the hearing after I'd spent a couple months with somebody and hear these, football score sentences, 10, 20, 30 years being passed down, and I would look and see the kids, 3 or 4 kids of the man or woman that I was there with, and would do the math in my head. How old are they going to be when mom or dad comes home? And most of the time they were going to be adults. And knowing that 70% of kids with a parent incarcerated follows in their parents' footsteps, that really hit me. And so our mission is to break generational cycles of incarceration.
Thank you. I'm Rebecca Smith, and I'm the founder of the Read Me a Story program. I started that program because I was a criminal defense attorney, and the most common theme, I was here for my clients when I go to prison or to jail to visit with them in preparation for their case, was how much they missed their children. And it made me understand how incarcerated people are people who are incarcerated. And they are mothers and fathers and grandparents, and they have people who depend on them and who look up to them. And what could we do to try and make that a little better? I read an article in People magazine, of all places, about a woman who started this program similar to what I began in Arizona. And she took children's books and a recording device into jails, and bedtime stories were read. Then she'd send the recordings out. So I started doing that about 30 years ago. And I would mail out the book as well as the recording, because I was trying to encourage reading, as well as family ties, as well as a chance for the incarcerated person to give a little personal message to their child. And that's when I really began to see God's light going through the prisons. Because, as we all know, it says in Matthew, I was in prison and you visited me. We're kind of supposed to do that. And I was amazed by the compassion inmates had for each other, because a lot of them had very difficult times reading. They didn't have good educational background or whatever, and they were helped by other inmates. There would be a classroom situation with anywhere from 3 to 10 inmates waiting their turn to read, and when someone would stumble on a word or become very emotional and need to stop for a few minutes, the other people were encouraging them. Come on, man, you can do it. Your kid needs you, that kind of thing. And probably the thing that was the most important to me was there was one time an inmate was wanting to send a book to his child because it was his birthday, but he was very shy and he didn't have good reading skills. So he wanted to just send the book, even though I was gently encouraging him to try and read a little bit of it or make up a story about the pictures or something. No, he didn't think that was a good idea. So I said, would you like to sing happy birthday to your child? And he looked at me, and then he looked a little embarrassed. And I thought, well, maybe he's a little embarrassed to sing in front of all these other folks that are here. So I said, would you like it if we all sang happy birthday to your child? Oh, yeah. And what goosebumps moment that was, with 10 male inmates with big tattoos and burly muscles and me singing happy birthday to a little 8-year-old boy who just missed his dad. That's what this is about.
Well, that's hard to follow up. I guess I'll start out by saying I knew I always liked Jeremy, but now I understand, and I want to say hello to his mom. I grew up in a small town. My name's Rick Carter, and I grew up in a small town in northeast Nebraska, and I grew up a Missouri Synod Lutheran. So there's something going on there. I knew there was something there I liked about Jeremy. So you've raised a good one, ma'am. There's no doubt about that. I work at an agency called the Community Justice Center, and I'll give you a little bit of background about that agency and then how I became a part of that agency and the work that we do. But the Community Justice Center was founded in 2001 by a gentleman by the name of Jim Jones. The Community Justice Center is a Black-led and Black-founded agency and has been in the 20 years that it's existed. And in that time, Jim brought to the organization an idea that he had been exposed to called restorative justice. And the idea of restorative justice is to look at harm in a different way than what law did you break and how should you be punished for breaking the law, but instead to look at it in an age-old tradition of restorative justice that really talks about harm as damaging human relationships, and what responsibility do you have to heal that harm, to repair that relationship. And restorative justice looks at it that way, and it provides a compass within the system. And through that work, we serve every correctional facility in the state of Nebraska. We also serve a weekly class at Douglas County Jail, and with the 12 reporting centers across the state of Nebraska with Nebraska Probation. So in those 20 years since Jim founded the organization, we've served a little bit more than 11,000 individuals have come through our programming. The vast majority of those, more than half of those, has been in the last 5 years. We've done a lot of expansion and our staff has grown. And I guess the way to kind of tie that into how I came to be a part of the restorative justice is that Community Justice Center, we call ourselves forensic peers. And that's a fancy way of saying that all of our facilitators have been justice-involved individuals themselves. I think of our 7 facilitators, I was trying to add in my head a little bit. I think our facilitators total about 71 years of residency within Nebraska, Iowa, and federal correctional institutions. And that includes one individual that we have on staff that at the age of 17, through a mistake that he made and a horrible choice that he made, one man ended up dead here in Omaha and another almost dead. And this individual at the age of 17 was sentenced to death by the state of Nebraska. He resided on death row in Nebraska for 2 years, and at the age of 19, the Nebraska Supreme Court came down with a decision that said Nebraska would not sentence a juvenile to death in the state. And so his death sentence was changed to a life sentence. He then went on to serve the next 39 years of that life sentence within the Nebraska Department of Correctional Services. A U.S. Supreme Court decision came down that said that you couldn't sentence a juvenile to life without the possibility of parole. And there have been some legal questions around some pieces with that, but I'm going to keep it short. As a result of that, he was able to go back to court for a modification of his sentence and was released 55 days later, walked out of the Omaha Correctional Center after serving a total of 41 years in our institutions. This individual now voluntarily returns to our institutions on a daily basis in order to give hope, to talk with other individuals, because he's an example that none of us are defined by the worst thing that we've ever done or the worst thing that's ever happened to us, that we have something to give back, that we are worthy of redemption. And to me, that's what brought me into the Community Justice Center, is this idea that together as a community, in representing those who've been harmed, in representing those who have done that harm, and wholly as a community, that we have a responsibility. Doug was talking about the numbers that we have in Department of Corrections, and I think an important one to remember is that upwards of 93, almost 95% of those individuals that currently reside in our institutions today will be returning to our community. And I think we have a choice to make. Do we want them to return as good neighbors, or do we want them to return facing the same obstacles that they were facing in their life, the same traumas that they were facing when they went in? And I think we all have a responsibility to help provide some of that support and some of those answers in eliminating those obstacles for individuals, because that's where healing really happens. And that healing is part of responsibility and accountability, but it comes from all of us working together. So I guess I'll kind of leave it at that, but that's what brought me to this, because I love what I do, and we'll talk a little bit more about who I get to work with on a daily basis all the time.
Thank you, Rick, and everyone who's answered that question. You touched a little bit on it, Rick, but I would love to hear from others as well about what type of programming you offer for those involved in the criminal justice system, and then how others can get involved.
So we want to run a program that is 6 months in 5 of the facilities, so 5 of the Nebraska prison facilities. And it is rigorous and very time-consuming. Participants work on a lot of character development. They create a 20-page reentry plan. They work on job readiness skills, and we have an entrepreneurship component. A lot of the people in our facilities have very good business minds. They have experience in entrepreneurship, and we want to take some of those skill sets and give them the language and tools to be successful in a legal context when they come home. When they finish that 6-month program, our in-prison team teaches and facilitates that, along with people on life sentences and longer sentences that serve as peer facilitators. They get, within a year of release, moved over to our reentry staff, who do case management, help them update their reentry plans. We work very closely with them if they have the opportunity to go to community corrections and work release. We help them with their employment for work release. And then we have a host of different programming and case management related opportunities when people do get back to the community. We have a 12-week business academy for those that do want to pursue entrepreneurship. We're in our 3rd class of that, and have right now 8 entrepreneurs who are running small businesses. We have 10 in our current class. We have a person who focuses on employment, so 91% of our release grads are employed today. And from a couple of years ago when we started this, the average hourly wage was around $12, and today it's $16 for our release graduates. We have a director of youth and family services that works with the families of their incarcerated loved one, where we're doing family rehabilitation and healing when people come home. I think the cornerstone of our program is hope. There's not a lot of hope in facilities, but hope and community are so critical to what we do. And so we have, in our logic model, a real focus on people we're trying to serve coming home, but there's also the community. So we've brought over 800 Nebraskans into facilities to do coaching and build empathy and review resumes and judge pitch competitions. And what that does is it shifts perspectives and it breaks down walls. Most of the people in our system have been victims of crimes in their own life, often as children. And so there's some empathy, and, you know, once I've met Doug and I see that, you know, he's had a hard life and, you know, made some bad choices, but see how hopefully it's about his future and how hard working he is, I'm more inclined to give him an opportunity. And so that's what we try to create. We can get people ready to come home, but if the community is not ready to welcome people home, they're going to struggle. 65% of our staff are formerly incarcerated, similar to some of the other organizations. The people closest to the problems have the solutions, so they inform our curriculum and they inform our work. Every one of our case managers has navigated their own recovery or their own reentry. So we've had over 500 people graduate our program in the state in the 5 years, and we have about 180 now that are back in the community.
Well, I've already told you a little bit about my program, and it started out very small, just me. And we've heard a lot about numbers, and the numbers are somewhat staggering for some of the problems with staffing and different things. But 1 is a pretty important number. And I have gone and talked to many different church groups, reading groups, and talked about how individuals could volunteer to help. There is naturally enough some resistance for people who don't want to go and volunteer to go into a jail, but there's lots of other ways people can help if they don't feel comfortable with doing that, by donating funds for postage or books or CDs or whatever is the medium that we're using at that point, to pray for the program, to encourage others to consider helping in, you know, addressing envelopes to send out the recordings, all that sort of thing. There's lots of different ways to do it. My contact information Caitlin has, and it's an email as well as a phone number and a physical address, and I'm happy to talk to anybody who might want me to come. Have you ever known an attorney who didn't want to talk? Come on. So let me know if anybody would like me to come and speak to your group or your church. I'm happy to do that, and there's lots of different ways to get involved. I'm also trying to start up a parenting class for inmates now at Douglas County Corrections, and that's just barely getting off the ground, so I appreciate any feedback from anybody about that as well. Thank you.
Well, I'll try and keep this a little bit shorter than my intro piece, but you know, our restorative justice program, it's really important to us and to, I believe, those that we're able to serve within our facilities and within probation. And to give you kind of a snapshot of it, we teach it's an 8-hour restorative justice intervention, and I'll give you kind of an idea. I mentioned that restorative justice talks about harm, but really we center upon 3 stakeholders. Very rarely when we look at an individual who is justice involved, did they actually harm the state of Nebraska. But on the top of their charge sheets, it says the individual versus the state of Nebraska. What we instead do is we say that in restorative justice, the victim has to be, the victim, the survivor, the one who's been harmed, has to be central to the process. And so what we try and do is we try and expand that definition from the state of Nebraska to who you harmed. Who did you actually harm? How did you harm an individual? How did you harm a community? What were we call them the domino or the ripple effects of the action that you took and the harm that you caused? What we believe in restorative justice is by taking responsibility for the totality of your harm, what you're doing is you're actually providing that healing, because you're looking at yourself and saying, what was truly the extent of what I did? And that's where healing can happen, because then you can say, what can I do to begin to repair that harm? And that's really a core piece of restorative justice, is how do we make victims central? Victims aren't central to a process of criminal justice or the legal system today. And instead, restorative justice said we've got to look at those who've been harmed, but we also have to look at those who've done the harm and what are their needs as well in the system. And Jeremy, I think, talked about it great. We have individuals, if you looked at trauma or childhood trauma, the most traumatized people in our society are those that are currently residing within our facilities. And it's easy to see a lifetime of trauma and a result of choices that led individuals into situations. And we shouldn't be surprised by some of the choices that individuals make out of survival mode, out of trauma mode. And what we also do is we look at those things. We call it emotional hygiene. We think people were taught how to take care of their physical hygiene, but a lot of times they haven't been shown a process for dealing with their own emotional hygiene. And I believe emotions, along with cognitive patterns, are important things to be talking about. We don't think anybody lacks something when they come to our class. What they may not have done is exercised what they had or had been shown. A lot of times, I don't know about anybody in here, but a lot of times growing up, I had adults or caretakers tell me that I needed to make better decisions in my life. And I used to look at them and think, okay, but don't you think if I knew how to make a better decision that sometimes I might make a better decision? And what we do is we sit down in a process that shows, let's talk about how you make better decisions. Let's show you a process for making better decisions so that when you return to a community, when you're working with reentry agencies, and I mean, RISE is one of the best out there. And I think one of the things that they do, and I love hearing Jeremy's numbers, it's about employment. And then the next step is, how do we help you keep that job that you get? And that takes where these other skills that Jeremy's talking about in life skills and these soft skills that we talk about is how do you retain that employment as you move on to your next job and the one that hopefully will be your career. So that's kind of what we do, is we do this program, we do a support group with it. We work with the University of Nebraska and Texas Tech University to study our data. We're very proud of the success rate. I like to talk about 83% of those who complete our program, not only within 3 years, but over 20 years, do not recidivate. Recidivism is one of these words we talk about a lot, you know, the likelihood that you're going to go back. I don't like to talk about failure rates. I like to talk about success rates, and to be able to talk about 83% of those never returning into those conditions. And I think that's something to be proud of. But I think it's not just us. It's everybody up here. It's a community that plays a role in that. And I think we all have a responsibility there. I said I was going to be shorter, and then I wasn't, so I apologize. That's why they should never just hand me a mic.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the audience? Thank you. What is the primary focus? What would you say is the primary focus of incarceration in Nebraska? Rehabilitation or maintenance?
Yeah. That's a very good question. You know, it should be rehabilitation. And I think there's a lot of components of the system that are aimed at rehabilitation. But unless you have a system that is healthy and more engaged and bringing groups like this even more inside, it's going to be more of a maintenance or even going backwards for some people. But I would hope there's a lot of good things that do happen inside that are focused on rehabilitation. One of the things that I really like that I should touch on real quick is club activities. There's a lot of clubs within those prisons, and they're run by the men and women inside, and sometimes they create their own, and a lot of these are self-created. The women at York just made a new one there that is going to have, I think, a big impact. There's some men at the state penitentiary that have created their new one there that Rick and I were at kind of a session with them recently that was really inspiring. Those are the kind of things that can really be rehabilitative and help everybody go forward. I've talked to a lot of men that have come out that say that that's actually what helped them turn the corner, was just having that internal club and group and everything. Unfortunately, like at Tecumseh right now, there's 3 groups that really are more aimed at different minority groups, and they have not let those groups meet since like 2017. The other day they suspended the lifers group, which is a really positive group, because of staffing issues and everything. So if we don't have a healthy environment and a healthy system, then those kind of things are impacted.
I don't really have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think staffing creates challenges with that. So there's a lot of organizations that do the rehabilitative or habilitative work. And the staffing challenge is real. We haven't been in Tecumseh in probably 2 months where we have our program, or LCC for about 2 months. And that takes people out of programming. It controls movement. So the domino effects of overcrowding and understaffing is people aren't getting programming. They're not getting clinical programming they need. They're not getting character development or job readiness or restorative justice or family, all the things that we need to be successful are hard right now. And that's where we're seeing the population struggling based on the understaffing. I didn't tell people how to get involved before, I forgot. I just want to share a couple quick things. We have churches that help us with welcome home bags. We often pick people up the day they get out from their parole hearing. We take them to a reentry house, but we give them a backpack, a welcome home bag with towels and toiletries and gift cards. And so that's something churches do, and they put these together for us. We have, when people graduate our program, they get a certificate in workforce readiness from UNO's business school, so we call them alumni of our program. So every Tuesday night we have supper club where anybody who's released can come to our office and share a meal and share how they're doing. And we have churches that will bring meals to our supper club. We're not bringing very many volunteers into the facilities right now like we did pre-pandemic. There was a point where we were bringing 30 or 40 people in at a time, and I think those days are gone for a while. But we are doing virtual volunteer opportunities where if you sign up to volunteer, you can review resumes and personal statements and business plans and take your time, and that information will come to you, and then we send it back into the facilities. And then hopefully there'll be an opportunity where we can bring people back into the facilities. Right now, we're grateful from corrections that when they can, they're still getting our staff in to do the work. And we know what a strain that's putting on the system. So right now, just getting in to do the class is all we can hope for, and maybe down the road we'll be able to bring more volunteers and more families in.
I'm going to ask another question, let others think if they would like to ask a question as well. So what has been the biggest surprise about the work or ministry that you do?
The biggest surprise, I think, was how supportive other incarcerated people were, because when you're incarcerated, there's pretty good motivation not to cry in front of other people. You don't want to be seen as weak. And in the small groups, the 3 to 10 people who were in for a reading session, that was pretty common for people to cry because they were missing their kids. And not once did anybody, laugh at them, make fun of them, harass them. There was a lot of arms around each other. Here's the Kleenex. You can do it. And that kind of encouragement from within their peer group, I think, was probably the biggest surprise.
Surprise. I don't know. That's a great question. I think maybe it's not. Maybe the word is for me isn't surprise. I think the things that get to me are the idea of how easy we as a community look at those that we lock away and want to forget about or to focus on punishment with them. I'm not surprised when I go into a facility and see great mothers and fathers and sons and brothers and parents. That doesn't surprise me because there's good people who made a mistake. And I think sometimes we all forget that if any one of us were forever defined by the worst thing we ever did, whether anybody else knew about that worst thing or not, where we might be sitting. And I think that the judgment, I'm surprised a lot by the judgment that not only are from a political side, but a community side that we pass on to individuals who've made a mistake. And sometimes horrible mistakes. I'll be the first one to admit that. I'm not trying to shirk that. But I think if everybody had the opportunity, I think that some of us up here get to have is to share a moment with individuals who are currently residing in these facilities. You're going to find that there are some wonderful individuals who have taken responsibility for what they've done and who are looking at not only changing their lives, but breaking chains of incarceration within their families, breaking chains of trauma, and looking at themselves in a different way. And I think my surprise is how we as a community seem to like to still judge those and pass that judgment on, and to say, you know, they're not worthy of something. And that to me, I guess, is my surprise, is that we get the chance to see some beautiful and amazing people on a daily basis. And I wish everybody had the opportunity to see them the way that I get to see them.
I don't know that the question applies to me so much, but I do have an interesting answer, I think, as far as surprise. When they created this position, I always like to tell the story about how I had some people come to me and said, you should apply for the job. And the short version is, I said, no, I don't want the job. And finally, somebody came back and they said, why don't you want to apply? And I said, well, I don't like going into prisons. And he said, well, nobody likes going into prisons. So I said, okay, I'll apply. And I got the job. And so I went from that step, and now some days when I kind of need a pick-me-up, I'll drive out to the penitentiary or wherever and go talk to staff. I'll go talk to a group or just go walk a housing unit or whatever, and I get picked up when I go out inside the facilities, and a lot of times I get lifted up, and it kind of turns my day around, and that's a total surprise for me. I did not anticipate that when I started the job.
It's not surprising to me, but it may be surprising to some that there's a tremendous amount of gratitude from our incarcerated brothers and sisters when people come in to pour into them. Genuine joy. And think about people who might not have had a visit for years. Nobody on their phone, visit list anymore. And so when the community comes in, it's transformational. It's sometimes the first kind of meaningful adult conversation someone's had in years. And reentry is crisis. And I think that's something people might be surprised to understand. It was crisis before the pandemic, and now it's off the charts. You think about the challenges with finding affordable housing, where people with certain felonies cannot access public housing, they cannot access food stamps, where employment becomes a bigger barrier, where there's 800 industries that just categorically will not hire people if they have a felony background. It's a surprise to me that everybody doesn't recidivate the way that this whole thing is set up. We have criminalized substance abuse, so when people get out and they're struggling and they relapse, if you're in the community, you can get support, you can get treatment. In the system, you go back to prison, you go back upstream when you have substance abuse issues. So I'll tell you, your treatment and your mental health is not going to improve by going back upstream into the prison. So that's where, as Rick was saying, the community is so important, because opportunities, access to health care, mental health, a place to sleep, just our basic needs. When you think about the hierarchy of needs, we're not doing a good job meeting just the most base level needs for people, and then we expect them to be successful. We expect them to take care of their families while they're paying for a transitional house, while they're paying for an ankle monitor, while they can't access simple things that people in their community can access. We've made it so hard for people to stay out and when they come home. And so I want to kind of surprise everyone with a kind of a wake-up call, because if you care about public safety and 96% of the people in prison are coming home and you want safe communities, you need to care about reentry. You need to care about how we're lifting up our brothers and sisters when they come home.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Another online question. Perfect. When do you anticipate visiting to resume? Do we have any updates on what that might look like?
Well, visiting has resumed at most places. It's just been interrupted by some of the staffing issues and everything. So visiting started up earlier this year and at all the facilities. So, but right now, like at LCC or Tecumseh, there's a lot of days when they have trouble staffing the visitation area and just having enough staff in the facility. So that does impact staff or the visitation quite a bit. One thing I know that is a problem for people is that they find out that visitation got canceled once they arrive. And if you're going down to Tecumseh, you might have driven an hour or two or even longer. So that's always kind of a difficult situation for you, and it's very troubling for me that people have to go through with that. One of the recommendations my office has made in the past is that we set up a text alert system that people can sign up for so that they could get notified when things like that happen or a facility gets locked down and everything. The department has said that they have no desire to do that, which is troubling to me because they should be trying to communicate more with people and helping them so we don't have situations like that. We'll keep pushing on that, though. We'll get them to do that eventually because it makes too much sense. But yeah, that's the answer for visitation.
Thank you. Can the panelists talk a bit about their efforts, if any, in juvenile incarceration or juvenile justice?
We have a program, we do our restorative justice program at the youth facility here in Omaha. We're talking right now at Lancaster County, and I think Doug mentioned a program at Nebraska State Penitentiary that is a resident-run program where they're really talking about wanting to address issues of youth violence. And I think that one of the things that we have to look at when we look at youth and youth violence and youth incarceration is that, we lock children up at this facility here in Omaha, as young as 13 and 14 years old. And then again, when you go back to what Jeremy's talking about, you take a 13-year-old and then they begin at the youth facility, they transfer into the adult facility when they age out of the youth facility and maybe spend 15 or 20 years within our correctional institutions. And then we're surprised that they struggle when they return to our community. And to me, we have to do a better job on the front end, right? It's about education program. It's looking, you've heard the word community a lot in here. We have to talk about communities. We have to talk about supporting youth around choices before that they make a decision to enter a gang. Before they make a decision, how do we provide those family supports? We're talking about living wage. We're talking about affordable housing. We're talking about access to food and these other things. And also a sense of community. I really have this belief, and maybe it doesn't even come from restorative justice, but it's this belief that says we don't harm things that we feel a part of. And when I feel a part of my community, I don't want to harm my community. And how do we take struggling kids in struggling neighborhoods that systemically we have isolated through policies and laws that we've enacted, and then how do we take them and make them feel a part of a community again? And I think there are ways to do that, but we shouldn't be surprised by this. And I think the last thing I will say about youth incarceration is that if you go back a few years, we've taken an entire generation, particularly, and I think about Omaha when I think about this, so I don't mean to just talk about Omaha, but we have seen an entire generation of especially young black men in our community either killed or incarcerated. And then we act surprised when a 13-year-old is doing something because they got told by a 16-year-old. Well, these individuals that are serving time with our institutions that came from these communities, they have a voice that needs to come back out to our community to say to these kids, we made mistakes, don't make the same mistakes that we made, and to show them a different way of doing that. And these individuals exist within our institutions, and we ought to give them the opportunity to help educate children in our community. Because I gotta be honest, I do a youth program. I'm a 49-year-old white man from Bancroft, Nebraska. I don't have a whole lot in common with a 15-year-old, black young man who grew up in North Omaha. But we have the answers that are sitting there within our institutions, and we ought to be giving them the opportunity to come out and help us heal those communities, to help us stop this youth violence.
I don't do a lot of work directly with juveniles, but I'm trying to get a parenting class going, and that will impact more. But just kind of talking to the inmates when they're reading the stories to their children and they become emotional, we might stop recording for a while and just talk a little bit about what they're feeling and what things they could do differently to when they are back home. Of, I never read to my kid before. Well, you'll have another opportunity to when you're at home. So you keep in mind you're going to be the role model. I've had a lot of inmates that were younger that would read for a sibling. I've had pregnant women read for their unborn babies. So there's establishing those family ties, and that's probably one of the greatest things I think that would encourage people to not have recidivism become part of their life. If they think ahead of, hey, I really didn't want to be away from my family and my family's hurting because of this, and not see just the advantage of committing a crime in the spur of the moment or the financial gain of it, but how is this impacting everybody else that I love? So I think that's probably all I have to say on that.
So we have time for one more question. Thank you so much for, let's take some from the audience. Yep, please, go ahead.
I was wondering, what is your opinion, Doug, on the role of mandatory minimum sentencing in contributing overcrowding?
That's a good question. The mandatory minimum sentences have had a great impact on our prison population, just not in Nebraska, but throughout the country. There's a group right now, CJI, that's working with state leaders to look at sentencing reforms and everything. I believe that should be on the table. There's a lot of people I've met, when you talk to them or you look them up, you see that sentence, and I mean, they're so, to me, excessive, and they don't give them much hope. They don't give them much opportunity then to move forward just because of the way the sentence is structured. So the legislature has looked at that in the past. There's bills, I think, virtually every session introduced on that. They've had good discussions, but they haven't done anything yet. But I think that will be part of the conversation this fall with that group of stakeholders.
Thank you. Yes.
It's a great book. Yep. Thanks for your comments, and that's the book is great. I've read the first book, not the second one. Yeah.
Add some books to my reading list. Thank you. Yeah, please. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Other questions, either online or here in person?
We actually have a book club called Rise Reads. That's a real thing that you can find on our website, csrise.org, which we read a different book every quarter, and often we'll have the author come and talk to our group as well. So,
I'm sure that
Little
politics.
plug.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jeremy. Sorry about that. I'm sure that politics plays a big role in what you do. Which senators need to hear from the public so that you can get the support you need to move your rehabilitative or restorative programs forward? As someone who's a lobbyist in their day job, I love this question. Thank you.
I think everybody was going to hand that to Doug, and then I intercepted it. Here's the answer, and then Doug can provide you an even better answer. All of them. All of them. I think the things that we're talking about here, you know, I've met wonderful people not only currently residing in our facilities, but who work in our facilities. And I think what we have to understand is a lot of the solutions that we're talking about when we talk about mandatory minimums, when we talk about sentencing reform, when we talk about correctional reform, when we talk about the need for both clinical and non-clinical programming, reentry support, the answers are political. They're political answers. It takes changing laws to make some of these things happen. And I think, unfortunately, we have, I guess maybe I'm going to probably get in trouble at some point. Let me know if there's a chat that comes across where I'm, lets me know I'm in trouble. We have a pardons board that's political. We have a parole board that are political appointees. We shouldn't be surprised that they respond to political pressures, right? The answer is that it takes us, a community, to start to support political answers to these questions. Ask those elected officials really where they stand about corrections, where they stand about sentencing reform. This is your money. I mean, we're talking about spending even more of your money on a new prison. And you just heard Doug talk about, we can't staff the facilities we have. What are we going to do with a new $250 million facility? Sit empty because we can't staff it? It's your tax dollars. When Jeremy was talking about public safety, we all have an interest in public safety. What we need to understand, there are ways to provide public safety that doesn't cost nationally $80 billion a year in a prison industrial complex. That's where the answers lie, but it takes us. It takes us exercising that at the voting booth. That takes us asking the hard questions, and it takes all of us speaking as advocates for those who are currently residing in our institutions. We talk to them all the time in class. Write your senators, write Doug, write others, and tell them about what's going on. But it's not enough. It takes every single person in here. It takes every person watching. It takes everybody you know. If you want to see a change, demand that it be changed. And there's one way to demand change, and that's exercise your right to vote and demand that change that way. And they'll listen. Now I'll stop.
That's a good interception. You're like Luke Reimers from Huskers yesterday, except for you scored. He didn't score yesterday, but he was close. I would say all senators, of course, but the ones that are kind of key right now would be the members of the Judiciary Committee. If you go to nebraskalegislature.gov, you can break it out by committee. That committee is very engaged. The Appropriations Committee, for the most part, those senators on that committee are very engaged because of the financial cost, but also because of the human cost and everything. I've had great conversations with those senators as well. And we have a whole bunch of other senators, actually. I think now is the time. There's been different times in the legislature over the last 25 or so years that have been kind of key points when things positive could be enacted and happen. And one of them was back when Senator Kermit Brashear was the chair of the Judiciary Committee, and there was a group, Dwight Peterson, my old boss Nancy Thompson, different people that were part of, they wanted to do something, and there's some positive things that happened back then. I think we're at one of those points right now. And even outside of the appropriations and judiciary, you have a lot of really good senators that want to be engaged. Senator Wayne, Senator brewer. I mean, you can just kind of go on. There's a lot of different folks that are really interested in this stuff. And part of my job is to actually keep them more informed and everything. So hopefully I'm doing my job and keeping them informed so that they're more engaged and they'll be more receptive to hearing from people. But I think for the most part, most of them are.
Thank you. All right, we have time for one more question. Staffing seems to be the root cause for program disruption. What can be done to improve staffing ratios?
I don't know how to answer that because I don't work in corrections, and I don't have a window into that. I will tell you, I know a lot of people then end up moving to the county where they get paid more. I know that's a part of the challenge. When there's violence, people leave their workplace. I think there's people that are sitting out of the marketplace right now. I think there's a lot of industry struggling to hire. And that's concerning. It's concerning for the restaurant and the local Main Street USA stores, and it's been a big issue in our state corrections system. So,
I think when I was talking earlier, kind of laid out some of those things that can be done when you're looking at wages, but better working environment, engaging with your staff, things like that the leadership of the department can do. But also as kind of a community that we can be more supportive of people in those positions and provide or express our thoughts about how valuable they are and everything. So I think, but along with that too, we need to expect a lot out of those staff as we kind of make changes and everything. Over in some of the countries in Europe, they go through training for quite a long period of time, and they're sought after positions because we or them as a community, they make them valuable. They see value in those positions and everything, and we need to do the same thing. If we do that here, I think we can have more success.
Please join me in a big round of applause of appreciation for our panelists, not only for taking the time to be with us today, but also for the hard work that they do in our community. And if you feel so moved, please consider volunteering or otherwise supporting one of the ministries featured here tonight. In a few moments, I'll invite those that are here in person to join us for a light reception outdoors. The gift shop will also be open. I did want to briefly plug 2 upcoming events that Balancing the Scales has. The first is a vigil in support of voting rights restoration for Nebraska citizens returning from prison at the Nebraska State Capitol on Saturday, October 23rd at 1 p.m. Currently, returning citizens in Nebraska are banned from voting for 2 years following the completion of their prison sentence. So please join fellow Episcopalians and people of goodwill, including some of our partners here tonight, in standing up for policy change to end this discriminatory practice. The event is offered as part of the festivities with annual council. However, the event's open to all, whether or not you attend council. The second is a book study that we'll be doing here at Trinity Cathedral on Sunday, October 14th at 2:30 p.m. Together we'll read, and this is available in the bookshop, which is part of why it's open tonight, The Sun Does Shine, How I Found Life and Freedom on Death Row. It's a memoir by Anthony Ray Hinton. Hinton was wrongfully convicted and spent 30 years on Alabama's death row before securing his release with the assistance of civil rights attorney and author of Just Mercy, Brian Stevenson. So together, we heard a lot about hope tonight. Together, we're going to explore themes of redemption, forgiveness, and the power of hope. So to get more information about these events and upcoming activities of Balancing the Scales, we have sign-up sheets in the back. I encourage you to sign up there, or you can sign up online by visiting our website, balancingthescales.org. Thank you again to our panelists and participants, both in person and online. I look forward to our continued work together. Oh, it's inside. Perfect. It'll be right to my left. Thank you.